The recent hike in fuel costs is set to see Kenyans pay more for transport, basic commodities such as cooking fat and buying of a packet of maize flour. The fuel price is marked among the highest hikes since last year, with a litre of super petrol going up by 15 shillings cumulatively. Here is more on just why Kenyans will have it rough in the next coming weeks.
With an already high cost of living occasioned by the coronavirus pandemic, Kenyans may just have to brace for tougher times ahead. The newly released pump prices for the month of March has sparked public uproar, with many terming the prices as outrageous and untimely. According to the new prices, a litre of petrol will retail at 122 shillings and 81 cents, up from 115 shillings. This marks an increase of 7 shillings and 63 cents.
I think it is very unfair because, as you know, our people and even all the businesses that we do, the small businesses, depend on the prices of fuel.
It's a sorry state of affairs, especially right now when things are not that good. The economy is just so bad. Things are expensive as we talk. And there are people dealing right now with corona, and adding an increase in fuel, I think, is just too much for the common man.
But what will this translate to on one's monthly budget?
There's so much that is happening. We have curfews, we have jobs that have been lost for the longest time. So prices being hiked right now, also the food prices will be affected, because whoever used to get mbogas from markets at a certain amount now is going to use more to get those mbogas. And it will also trickle down to the mwananchi wa kawaida.
Public transport and manufacturers are also expected to readjust prices, with the diesel prices also having rose.
We have been trying to shout because we saw it coming. It already has affected our businesses. In fact, some guys are just down and closed.
A litre of diesel shot up by 5 shillings and 75 cents. The overall outlook remains bleak for a majority of households who may have to dig deeper to afford living in the capital city and in the satellite towns, with the fuel being a main driver of cost of goods.
Instead of piling all the taxes upon one area,
industry players in the petroleum sector claim that Kenya's fuel pricing formula is skewed and needs a rethink if Kenyans are to benefit.
the landed cost for this product, which we have today, is just about 49 shillings. Then on top of that, you add about 58 shillings for which are taxes. Very many, a list of different levies. I was counting them, and there are 9 different levies, which are supposed to be funded by the same mafuta.
Abiagina, KTN News.
Right, that forming the basis of our conversation at this moment. We've seen a lot of reactions from Kenyans, from the political class, members of parliament even, on the cost of fuel prices. And many say that perhaps there will be a spiraling effect in very many aspects of the economy, from price of basic commodities to the manufacturing sector. Electricity prices, Kenyans have already been complaining about that, and it's set to go up. So how did we get ourselves in this mess as a country? Wanjiro Gekonyo joining us in studio here. She's the national coordinator of the Institute for Social Accountability. Thank you very much, Wanjiro. And Professor Exen Iraki joining us from our City Center studios. He is an economist. Gentleman and lady, thank you very much for joining us. And thank you for your patience up to this hour. I think I'll start with you, Professor, because you've not said anything since we started the bulletin. Looking at this latest fuel prices, the big conversation right now is around taxation of fuel. A lot of players saying that fuel has swiftly become a soft underbelly for taxation upon taxation constantly by this government. Are we not being innovative enough as a country? How did we get here? Professor, I hope you can hear me.
I can hear you now.
Great. Your thoughts on the hiking of fuel prices, and are we likely to see this trend continue, the increase of fuel prices in the country?
Yesterday at around noon, I had the message that the fuel price is going to go up. So what I did is I went to the nearest petrol station and filled my 2 small cars with 100 liters of super petrol. If you compare the old price and the new price, that was an extra 700 shillings. If you divide by the price of bread, that's about 14 loaves of bread. Some of you might think that I am a hustler, but I'm being realistic. But let's go to the heart of the matter. Why are the fuel prices rising? To a person on the streets, it's about government trying to raise more taxes or more revenues because the government revenues have been depressed by COVID-19. But there are also international reasons why the prices are going up. One, which is surprising, is the discovery of the vaccine for COVID-19. People start seeing chances of normality coming back. So we expect the demand for goods and services to go up, transport and so on. And that is putting pressure on the price of petrol, diesel, and so on. Number 2 is that OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, have been able to reduce the supply of oil, and that has made the price go up. And number 3, surprisingly, is that Democrats won in the US. So they may not have a lot of interest in fossil fuels like President Trump. And that might reduce the price of, not reduce, but increase the price of petrol and the other petroleum products because the supply is reducing. So here is an interplay of international market and the local market to push the price up. But to the person on the streets, it's very hard to convince him or her that the international pressures are forcing the price to go up. So we see the government as the cause because it is controlling the price. That is the way I see it.
Yes, but even with, international factors that you've mentioned, back to the first question I asked on fuel and the taxation around it, the levies around it, it's undeniably high, according to a lot of experts, especially in this particular field. Don't you agree?
The issue, the tax rate, if you compare the tax rate on fuel prices, it's probably way above 30%, which is the average tax rate in this country. So I totally agree with you, the tax rate is very high. And that is my biggest concern, that we should reduce the price so that the raw oil prices act as a stimulus package. Remember that with COVID-19, the economy has been depressed. So we need to do anything that is possible to make sure that the economy does not remain stagnant but grows. And which is a better way than reducing the price of petrol, diesel, and other petroleum products so that the money that we save can be used elsewhere. In fact, I see in the long run that the increase in the price of petrol and diesel and so on might be counterproductive. Because if we reduce economic activities, then the money that we are getting from the tax, we might lose it in other reduced economic activities.
Wanjiru, I'd really like to bring you in at this point. When we begin the show, I just got a comment from you during the bulletin, and you said our biggest problem right now is this regime and how they've been making decisions, and especially Parliament has been on the receiving end today pertaining some of the laws they've passed around taxing of fuel.
Right, and rightly so. The failure goes back to the expansionist budget. I mean, you remember the wish list, this amazing manifesto that was littered with projects that Jubilee offered the country. Now, you need to pay for projects. Now, then Jubilee has tried to implement several of these projects. Some of them have become white elephants within this period. But you then have to pay from taxation and from borrowing. So if you look at the borrowing trend, around 2014, 2015, 2016, huge loans were taken at very high and unfavorable rates and put in unproductive investments that aren't then going to pay off. So mistakes were made in the borrowing decisions around that. And that has then spiraled into what you can call a debt trap, where we are borrowing to pay the interest on debt. So we are borrowing to pay debt, and the more we do that, the more then we get into this cyclical borrowing. And part of the impacts of that has been this. Domestic borrowing has gone up to pay off these overseas loans, and as that happens, you squeeze out business, so local revenues fall, and therefore you have to borrow more because local revenue isn't generating. And then, of course, this was before COVID. So even before COVID, business was under pressure, getting squeezed out, revenues were falling. Revenues have been falling for 4 straight years. And government has been increasing the number of taxes. Now, the thing with fuel, the VAT taxes, these kind of broad consumer taxes, is that they're very easy to implement, very easy to collect. So when government is stuck and they need money and they know that they have debt repayments coming up and there's a risk that collateral, you saw in today's paper,
right.
Yeah, some of you know, and you'd say some of these are illegal because these want to disclose terms around some of these loans. Yeah. So when you put up Kenya assets and they're at risk due to failure to repay debt, you then get into panic borrowing and panic, then levying taxes on a panic basis.
Right.
So this is why I said there's a failure of policy, because this isn't a reasoned policy. The last point I'd like to make here is that, of course, we've gone back into the IMF, you know, kind of financial arrangements. And we know that the IMF has been very keen to expand what they call the tax base in this country. And there's need to really, once and for all, get to the bottom of this so-called broadening the tax base, because this IMF policy is failing. And I think Professor Iraki has said it's going to be counterproductive, because if you have a spiral effect, increasing the cost of living, further suppressing business, we are also seeing the exchange rate not working in our favor, because when
right.
you borrowed in foreign denomination, and then you're going to pay back higher amounts, you know, the value of our debt repayment has gone up by 10%.
Right. Right.
So we are really getting, we are jumping from the pan into the fire. And there are options that government has been given, Treasury has been given, Parliament has been given, and they are not exercising those options.
Right. And we've been having a conversation, Professor Iraki, since the onset of COVID-19. The government and the president specifically has said they want to cushion Kenyans from the tough economic times. So that now with this increase of fuel prices and the trickle-down effect expected, are we not going against the initial intention of cushioning Kenyans, and especially the low-income earners? Look at the price of kerosene, for instance, skyrocketing as of today.
So I think the government would want to caution its citizens against bad economic situation. But I think that is always easier said than done. Nobody foresaw COVID coming. The government needs money. So the question is always, if you want to get revenue, which is the easiest method? And Wanjiru Gekonyo put it very easily, taxation is a much easier method. And notice where we are focusing: petrol, kerosene, and diesel. Because at the end of the day, we get addicted to cars. We get addicted to certain fuels. So the government knows that even if the price goes up, we are going to travel. We are going to use to take our cars. We are going to take matatus to work. We are going to use gas for cooking and so on. So it becomes a much easier way of getting revenues, but it's not the most effective. Because in the long run, you end up killing the goose that lays the golden egg. The economy is always developed by you and me going to work, doing our work. And remember, at the end of the day, a lot of productivity of this country, whether you are producing goods or services, has some petroleum input. So the moment you raise the prices, you affect the productivity of the economy. And that affects not just the people on the lower echelons of the society, but also people higher up, because we all use transport, we all use cooking gas, we all use petroleum products. In fact, one of the things I'm suggesting tonight is we started controlling the price of petrol because we do not want the price to go up. So what I'm suggesting is, why don't we try the market economy? Maybe at the end of the day, why don't we try the market to control the price? You never know, at the end of the day, you may find that the price might go lower. Number two, Kenya is producing petroleum. Why don't we produce more petroleum from the northern Kenya and other parts of the country where we are getting oil? So that if we produce more petroleum, the supply will go up and the price is going to go down. So those are some of the two basic solutions that I think we can institute immediately, and then we end up finding the price going down so that the Mwananchi, our Wanjiku on the streets, end up benefiting from what we are calling as cautioning the citizens against adverse economic activities.
Currently,
and
with
one
this,
more thing,
yes.
I know there was a law in Parliament the other day. There was a law in Parliament the other day that was supposed to subsidize the price of petroleum products, specifically diesel and kerosene. And the government has collected a lot of money. Why has that particular subsidy not kicked in? The reason we are given is that there are no regulations. Coming up with regulations to give Kenyan consumers a subsidy is not very hard work. Why don't we do that? Because whether you are rich, whether you are poor, we are affected by the price of petroleum.
So then what do things look like for Kenyans, and any Kenyan watching right now, looking at the taxation, heavy taxation on a lot of basic commodities and the effects therein that we are likely to see. We're looking at the pandemic. We are on our third wave now. Things are not looking very good, but the tax regime returned. So what do things look like for Kenyans right now? February hit high levels of inflation. Are we likely to see that in the continuing months? Professor Iraqi, briefly.
I think things don't look very good for Kenyans because of not just the increase in taxes. One of my biggest fears now as we talk, or from where I sit, is that the rains have not come. And I'm hoping it's going to rain very soon. Because if it doesn't rain, we have COVID, and then the prices of petroleum go up, then we are going to have a triple problem. So I think that is why the government needs to come in and caution ordinary Kenyans against the adverse economic circumstances. Because as an ordinary person, COVID is already bad enough. So anything else coming over and above COVID is going to have a very adverse effect on all of us. In fact, if you have been noticing the last 1 month, traffic has not been as bad as we expected on the streets of Nairobi or on the highways because people are leaving their cars at home. And when people don't go to work, when people don't go for their business, when people don't go for entertainment and so on, we reduce the economic activities. And that is going to have a ripple effect throughout.
Could be counterproductive.
So I think it's not good for ordinary Kenyans and for any Kenyans, and we need to do something about it.
All right. Wanjiru, not much time, but you started by talking about, passionately talking about the issue of debt. So our taxation is directly proportionate, perhaps, to our borrowing. How do we get out of this mess? We seem to be in a hole, and we are continuing to dig as a country. Things look bleak, actually.
Well, we're not digging as a country. We have a regime that's digging, and there are reasons for this. And, you know, our analysis points towards budgeted corruption, their interests. And why do I say this? The Parliamentary Budget Office was very, you know, Parliament has actually just approved, is it what, 2.3 trillion, you know, budget, which is laden with a lot of the projects that have brought us into this problem. So instead of curbing unnecessary expenditure, government is using COVID to continue financing the very same projects. And so what the Parliamentary Budget Office did is they analyzed and said, okay, we're going to spend, you know, I can't remember the figure, whether it's 2.7 trillion shillings. Where we put the money matters. We do want the economic cushion. But how do you cushion if you're going to put money in projects that are not productive? Where should we be putting the money? We should be putting it in agriculture. We should be putting it in local health solutions. We should be supporting local infrastructure. So there were very direct suggestions given, but these are likely not to see the light of day.
Okay.
Why? Because there are contracts around large infrastructure, and in fact, the BPS was very clear. Let us fast track the legacy projects of the president. Mm-hmm. Now these are the problem, the SGRs, the lap sets, some of the dams that didn't have feasibility studies. You can't put good money after bad. And unfortunately, there's a trick that the Treasury has played, where they say we are doing a COVID cushion, and they bring the same legacy projects and call them the COVID cushion, and they are not. Mm-hmm. So in other words, government isn't being honest. They're not giving the right information. We've contracted debt. We are not clear on some of the terms of the repayment. We are not clear on some of the liabilities that have come with those loans. And unfortunately, Parliament is then in the pocket of the executive. Right. They are letting everything pass, and the buck and the weight, the burden is falling on Kenyans. So it's really up to Kenyans to say no.
And talking about some of the solutions, earlier on, ANC party leader Musalia Mudavadi addressed the press on the issue of fuel prices and the hiking of it all, and went ahead to give proposals on how he thinks we can best handle this situation. Let's play that bite before we get our guests to comment on that as we wrap up.
The ministry, as a matter of urgency, must do the following. 1, revise the formula used in pricing fuel. 2, review the tax regime on fuel products. A tax equivalent to 100% of pump price is unsustainable, punitive, and inflationary to the Kenyan people. The tax regime should also provide incentives for investments in clean and renewable energy.
Professor, I'll start with you, and really briefly, just we close the show. Are these proposals by Musalia Mudavadi viable? Revising the formula and reviewing the tax regime, will it help in any way?
I think the former vice president has a point, because I don't think the formula is the main issue. The question is what goes into that formula. At the end of the day, I will not be very bothered with the formula. I would be bothered with reducing tax. And the question we should be asking is, if the government reduces the taxes, what is the alternative revenue stream? And I have a simple solution. Let's live within our means. And number 2, let's reduce corruption and waste. If we can do that, then the money that we are very interested in getting through tax can be got through other means. I like Mr. Musalia Mudavadi's focus on renewable energy. If you look at the energy mix in Kenya, we are getting more and more of renewable energy. But let's be realistic. If you look at the areas like transport, it will take a lot of time before we wean ourselves off fossil fuels. I know we are getting electric cars, but it will take time before we start driving electric cars. I know we can use electric trains, but it will take time before we start using electric trains.
Right.
So I think that solution is in the long run.
Okay.
But in the short run, what are the most tangible solutions?
Wanjiru, your thoughts on Musalia Mudavadi's proposals as you give us your closing remarks?
They're fine, and like Professor Iraqi says, those are policy proposals that really don't go to the heart of the matter. In my view, this is a political issue, and the political decision that the executive hasn't taken, that Parliament hasn't taken, is to curb unnecessary expenditure. And so we've got a burgeoning budget, and we need to really cut the money going to the legacy projects and put the money into productive areas, and that will enable us to reduce the deficit, reduce the borrowing, and begin to really move towards a sustainable and balanced budget.
Way to end it, and it's a conversation we'll keep having. Just see whether the government will be up to, make some counter policies to help cushion Kenyans. There's been a lot of outrage, and especially towards Parliament, for passing all these tax laws that have come back to bite Kenyans. Wanjiro Gikonyo, National Coordinator, TISA, as well as Professor Exen Iraki, joining us from our City Center studios, an economist. Thank you very much for joining us. Robinson Okenya comes in next with the KPL review show, so do stay tuned for that conversation. I'll be seeing you tomorrow night on the front row. I am Akisa Wandera. Have a good night.